The chocolate cake was still warm in my hands when Daniel's spit hit my cheek. I stood frozen in the doorway of the house I had called home for 32 years, clutching the same 3-layer cake I'd baked every year since he turned 7. His favorite, chocolate with buttercream roses, made from his grandmother's recipe. My arthritic hands had stirred that batter carefully, humming the lullaby I used to sing to him when he couldn't sleep. But the words that came out of his mouth weren't sweet. "Pay the rent or get out," he said coldly, like he was talking to someone who'd overstayed their welcome, not his own mother. I blinked at him, confused, my eyes burning. "Danny, it's your birthday." I called him by the nickname I'd used since he was in diapers, but he just laughed, not kindly. It was the kind of laugh that broke something inside you. "You think a cake makes up for 3 months of unpaid rent?" he snapped. "You think I'm still 12 years old?" My fingers trembled. I felt the roses on the cake smush against the box. Behind him, through the kitchen window, I could see the backyard where I'd once taught him how to ride a bike, where we used to plant tomatoes every spring until he decided gardening was for losers. "I have the money," I whispered, even though we both knew I didn't. My disability check had been cut. Medicare no longer covered the physical therapy I needed for my back. And the part-time job at the grocery store had let me go when they said someone my age was too slow. But Daniel didn't care. He stepped closer, the scent of expensive cologne mixed with something sharp, maybe anger, maybe disgust. "You've been bleeding me dry for 2 years, he said. "Do you know what my friends say when they find out I still support my mother?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to remind him of the nights I worked double shifts at the diner to pay his school fees, the loans I took when he got into college, the nights I came home with blistered feet but still helped him finish homework. Instead I said, "I raised you alone, after your father left." My voice cracked, and his response was like a slap. "And I'm grateful," he said bitterly, "but gratitude has limits." Then he added, "I have a life now. Have Lisa. We're planning a wedding. I can't keep throwing money into the black hole of your bad decisions." Bad decisions. As if getting fibromyalgia was a choice. As if loving him too much had been my greatest mistake. "Where am I supposed to go?" The words came out before I could stop them. Daniel shrugged and turned away. "There are shelters. Senior housing. It's not my problem anymore." The door started to close, but something inside me pushed back. I used my shoulder to stop it. "Danny, please, it's me. It's your mother." That's when he spit in my face. And I'll never forget the way he looked at me. Cold. Unrecognizable. "You're nobody to me," he said. "Just another deadbeat tenant who can't pay her bills." Then the door slammed, and I heard the deadbolt turn. The same lock I taught him to use when he was 8 years old and afraid of monsters. I stood there for a long time, holding that cake, feeling the spit dry on my cheek like a stain. Then I walked to the curb and sat on the sidewalk. The concrete was cold through my thin pants, and the bottom of the cake box was wet with tears. Cars passed. Neighbors who had known me for decades looked the other way. No one asked why Melanie Ford was sitting outside with a birthday cake at 4 in the afternoon. I opened the box and looked at it. 3 layers of everything I had ever been. Mother. Provider. The one who remembered birthdays and favorite breakfast orders. The roses were crushed, but the icing still red. "Happy 29th birthday, Danny. Love always, Mom." Took a bite. It was perfect. Moist, rich, with just the right hint of vanilla. But it didn't matter. Perfection means nothing when the person you made it for has already decided you're disposable. The sun began to set, painting the sky in the same soft pink as the roses on Daniel's cake. All around me, lights flicked on in homes where families were gathering for dinner. I imagined the hum of televisions, the clatter of forks, the quiet rhythm of lives moving forward. Lives I was no longer part of. A police car slowed as it passed me, the officer glancing at the sight of an older woman sitting on the curb with a smashed cake and swollen eyes. But he didn't stop. Maybe he thought I was drunk. Maybe just someone else's problem. By the time darkness fell, a truth settled inside me like a stone. I was alone. Not just that night, but in a deeper, irreversible way. The child I had carried, nursed, protected, and loved had erased me with a locked door and a cruel sentence. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through contacts I hadn't looked at in months. Daniel was still listed first. Danny, as if I hadn't updated my reality. Below him, a few co-workers from jobs I no longer had. Some neighbors who had slowly faded when money got tight. My sister Carmen, now in Arizona, who rarely called. I didn't call any of them. Instead, I sat there until the cake was gone. Not because I was hungry, but because it was the last thing I had that meant anything. The empty box beside me looked like a tombstone. I leaned back against the chain-link fence, closed my eyes, and tried to process how love could turn to nothing so quickly. How 30 years of care could vanish with a single slammed door. Somewhere a church bell rang. Midnight. Daniel's birthday was over. And in a way I couldn't name yet, so was mine. 3 weeks passed before the rain stopped, and by then I had learned how to disappear. Not in the magical way books described, but in the quiet, brutal way life teaches you. I slept on a cot at the Salvation Army shelter on 4th Street, between Maria, who whispered prayers all night, and Janet, who'd been evicted after her disability check got lost in the mail. I stood in lines at St. Vincent's for soup and stale bread. I walked past houses I once knew, becoming background noise. Street sign. Shadow. The hardest part wasn't the cold or the hunger. It was remembering not to care. Every morning I had to remind myself not to reach for my phone, not to wonder if Daniel had eaten. Every night, I fought the habit of mentally checking if his car was home, if he'd made it back safe. My body still remembered how to be a mother, even though I had nothing left to mother. On the 23rd day, I was sitting in McDonald's, nursing $1 coffee and using free Wi-Fi to search for jobs that no one would give to someone with my age and health. 2 women sat in the booth behind me talking. "She just walked out," one of them said. "Didn't even give notice. Left Mrs. Henderson sitting in her own filth for 6 hours." The other scoffed. "Caregivers these days have no dedication. Back in my time, people took pride in their work." Without thinking, I turned around. "Are you talking about a caregiving job?" My voice was rusty from disuse. The first woman looked me over. Thrift store clothes, messy hair, holding a paper cup like it was gold. "Do you have experience?" I thought of the years I spent caring for my own mother, feeding her, bathing her, singing her to sleep through pain. "Yes," I said. That afternoon, I stood outside a modest house in Riverside. The yard was overgrown, but the windows were clean, and someone had placed ceramic pots of flowers near the front door. There was still care in this place. Adelaide Henderson was 91 years old, with a sharp mind trapped in a failing body. Her arthritis twisted her fingers, a stroke had weakened her right side, but her eyes were bright with something that stopped me: loneliness. "You don't look like the others," she said, studying me. "The agency sends girls glued to their phones. Not people who notice whether I'm still breathing." "I don't have much of a life to check on," I said before I could stop myself. She smiled for the first time. "Good. Neither do I. We might just get along." The job didn't pay much. Barely above minimum wage. But it came with something I hadn't had in a long time. Purpose. For 8 hours a day I mattered. I helped her bathe, eat, dress. I read to her. I watched her laugh at romance novels and argue with mystery books. She told me about her garden, her husband, her children who lived too far to visit. And most important, she never asked about my past. Maybe she sensed it. Or maybe she just understood that some stories are too heavy for casual conversation. We lived in the present. Her needs, my ability to meet them. Care given. Care received. After a month, Mrs. Henderson asked me to move into her spare room. "The rent's nothing," she said. "Just help me during nights. I get scared when the house is too quiet." I understood quiet. I understood being scared. So I moved in with 2 garbage bags of clothes, a photo of Daniel I couldn't throw away, and the journal I started writing in at the shelter. The bedroom had rosebud wallpaper and a twin bed that felt like luxury after concrete and CS. That night, I cried into lavender-scented pillows, not from sadness, but from the relief of walls, of a locked door, of something like home. The work was harder than I expected. Mrs. Henderson's diabetes meant learning how to monitor blood sugar and manage insulin. Her medications were scheduled like a delicate dance, some with food, some hours apart, none allowed to mix. I helped her through physical therapy exercises, tracked down doctors, and wrestled with insurance paperwork that made my head spin. But I was good at it. Years of managing other people's needs had trained me well. All those sleepless nights as a mother, always anticipating problems before they arrived, suddenly felt like a skill set. "You're different from the others," Mrs. Henderson said one night as I helped her into her nightgown. "You notice things. That I like my coffee with half a sugar. That I get anxious when the hallway light's on. That I can't sleep when it storms." She paused, looking up at me. "Most people see an old woman who needs help. You see a person." I tucked the blanket around her shoulders, the way I used to do for Daniel when he was small. "Everyone deserves to be seen," I said quietly. Later that night, I caught my own reflection in her dresser mirror. Thinner, grayer. A face with new lines that hadn't been there before. I looked like someone who'd been through something. But I also looked like someone who'd made it through. When she asked if I saw myself too, I answered honestly, "I'm working on that." In the weeks that followed, I learned something motherhood had never taught me: the difference between being needed and being used. Mrs. Henderson needed me, yes. But she also respected me. She asked how my day was. She remembered details about my life. She offered me tea when I was sick. She even gave me full access to her book collection when I told her I missed reading. That simple exchange, mutual care, made me feel human again. Then, on a Tuesday morning in March, everything shifted. I was preparing Mrs. Henderson's breakfast when shouting cut through the quiet like a knife. The voices came from next door, angry, slurred, filled with venom. "You worthless piece of crash." Something broke. Porcelain, maybe. Mrs. Henderson flinched in her chair. "That's Mr. Kowalski," she murmured. "He takes care of his mother since her stroke." Through the window, I saw a man stumbling across the patio, dragging a wheelchair behind him. In it sat an elderly woman, limp, silent, eyes wide with fear. Mrs. Henderson's voice was low. "He lost his job. Started drinking. It's been a while." The next day, the yelling got worse. I heard sobbing, then pleading. "Please, please, I'm sorry," an old woman cried over and over. I set down Mrs. Henderson's tray and walked to the window. Mr. Kowalski was dragging the wheelchair again. Not carefully, not gently. Rage poured from him about pills, doctors, money. "Don't get involved," Mrs. Henderson warned. "People like that, they don't want help. They just want someone to blame." But my feet were already moving. Maybe it was muscle memory from all those years protecting Daniel, even when the threat was his own father's voice raised too loud. Or maybe it was because I knew what it felt like to be trapped with no one to speak up for you. I knocked on his door. He opened it, beer in hand, eyes bloodshot. "What?" "I'm Meline," I said. "I take care of Mrs. Henderson next door. I was wondering if you need help." He narrowed his eyes. "Help? From who?" "You." Behind him, I saw Mrs. Kowalski, bruises on her arm, body slumped in the chair. "I'm not here to judge," I said gently. "I know how hard it is. Caregiving can break you if you don't have support." His face twitched. Recognition. Or just exhaustion. "You have no idea," he muttered. "She wets herself 6 times a day. She can't remember my name. I haven't slept through the night in 2 years." "I do understand," I said. "I've been there." We stood in silence until I asked, "When's the last time you had a break?" He laughed, bitter, hopeless. "A break? Who's giving me that? Social services. Family. I don't even have friends anymore." "I can come by a few hours a week," I offered. "Let you rest. Run errands. Sleep." "Why?" he asked. Because I remembered what it felt like to be discarded. Because I knew what happened when pain festered without release. Because someone had to speak up for people who couldn't anymore. I just think everyone deserves help, I said. That afternoon, I fed Mrs. Kowalski lunch. She was more alert than she seemed, and once she relaxed, she told me about her garden, her son's childhood, the stroke that stole half her body. "He's not a bad boy," she whispered. "Just scared. Just lost." When he returned, I handed him a list: caregiver support groups, mental health resources, respite programs. He stared at it like I'd given him a map out of the storm. Over the weeks that followed, I kept going. 3 afternoons a week. Cleaning, cooking, listening. Slowly, Mr. Kowalski began to change. He started attending the support group, cut back on drinking, began to see his mother again. Not just the burden. The guilt started melting into something softer. He began calling her Mom again. "You saved us," he said once. I was about to. I don't know what I was about to do. But it wouldn't have been good. Later that night, back in Mrs. Henderson's kitchen, I stirred soup and thought about how thin the line was between stress and cruelty. How many people were one sleepless night away from making an irreversible mistake? "You did something important," Mrs. Henderson said, not looking up from her crossword. "But you also did something dangerous. What if he'd hurt you?" I smiled softly. Then I would have called Adult Protective Services. But sometimes people just need to know they're not invisible. She looked up and met my eyes. "Is that what you needed when your son—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. He nodded. "Maybe. Or maybe I needed to become the kind of person who knocks on the door." Word spread, not through gossip or headlines, but in quiet conversations. A neighbor mentioned me to another. A visiting nurse passed along my name to a family in need. One day I was helping Mrs. Kowalski with lunch. The next, I was guiding a daughter through the paperwork to admit her father into hospice. Within 6 months, I was working for 3 families instead of 1. Coordinating care, offering respite, teaching others how to navigate the maze of insurance, medical jargon, and daily exhaustion. I didn't have certifications. No degrees. But I had something harder to earn: trust. Experience. The kind of wisdom only pain teaches. "You're becoming someone important," Mrs. Henderson said one evening as I updated another client's medication chart at her kitchen table. "I'm becoming useful," I corrected. "There's a difference." She smiled gently. Usefulness is just importance without needing applause. I thought about her words that night as I fell asleep in my little room, surrounded by the rosebud wallpaper and the soft smell of lavender. For the first time since Daniel's birthday, I wasn't surviving from day to day. I was building something. Not the life I had planned, but a life that mattered. A few months later, I sat in a circle of chairs at the community center. 12 people looked at me with eyes shadowed by sleepless nights and too much responsibility. "Welcome to our monthly family caregiver support group," I began, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "I know it's not easy to be here. I know there are 100 other things you could be doing." A woman in her 50s, Sarah, according to her intake form, let out a sharp laugh. "Yeah, I could be at home making sure my father doesn't fall down the stairs again. But if I don't get out of that house for 2 hours, I'm going to lose my mind." The group murmured in agreement. I knew that tone, half humor, half desperation. I had heard it in Mr. Kowalski's voice. I had spoken it myself once, sitting on a curb with a cake box in my lap. "Tell us about your father," I said. One by one, stories poured out. A daughter who gave up her job to care for her mother with dementia. A husband drowning in medical debt after his wife's cancer treatment. A son who hadn't slept through the night in 3 years because his dad's Parkinson's made him pace like a ghost in the dark. Each story was unique, but they all echoed the same ache. People who had become invisible in their own lives. People defined not by their dreams or names, but by someone else's needs. "The hardest part," said a man named Benjamin caring for his wife with ALS, "is that nobody sees you. They ask how she's doing, like I'm just an extension of her illness. They don't want to know that I'm scared and angry and tired, and that I don't know who I am anymore." After the meeting, Benjamin lingered while I folded chairs. "You're different," he said. You don't just sympathize. You understand. I looked away. Experience is a hard teacher. What did it teach you? I hesitated. I didn't talk about my past. I didn't need sympathy. But Benjamin's question landed somewhere deep. That rock bottom can be a foundation, I said at last. If you're willing to build. He nodded slowly. Sounds like you've done some building. He was right. What started with helping a neighbor had become something bigger. I'd created a binder system full of local resources. Shelter contacts, meal programs, hospice and equipment loans. Families no longer had to buy walkers or hospital beds they'd only need for a few weeks. They could borrow them from us. More importantly, I had become a connector, someone who could say, "Talk to the Johnsons, their daughter went through this," or "Call Mr. Singh. He knows a great doctor for that condition." Dr. Patricia Ramirez, a geriatrician who often referred families to me, suggested something I hadn't considered. You should think about formal training. You've got instincts most nurses take years to develop. So at 59, I enrolled in a night program at the local community college. Gerontology and family caregiving. I was the oldest in every class. But the instructors noticed something in me. Professor Williams pulled me aside after a discussion on caregiver burnout. "You're not just learning," she said. "You're connecting it to something real." She was right. Every lecture reminded me of someone. Mrs. Henderson, the Kowalskis, Sarah. Every case study echoed a moment I'd already lived. The hardest class was the one on elder abuse. As Professor Williams described the signs, neglect, stress, resentment, I remembered all the homes I'd walked into where the line between care and harm was paper thin. Where someone like me had to say, softly but firmly, "You're not alone, and this doesn't have to break you." One night after class I stayed behind. "What if you see the signs?" I asked. "But the family refuses help." Professor Williams gave me a tired smile. "Then you plant the seed. Sometimes they'll come back. Sometimes they won't. But they'll remember that someone saw them." On my walk home I thought about those words. And I thought about the person I used to be. The woman erased by her son's rejection, surviving only because strangers handed her a blanket or a sandwich or a quiet room. I wasn't her anymore. When I reached the house, Mrs. Henderson was waiting in her usual spot by the window. She looked older now, more delicate, but her eyes still held fire. "How was class?" she asked as I helped her into bed. "Challenging," I said. "We talked about abuse prevention." She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, "Do you still think about him? Your son?" It was rare for her to mention Daniel. "Every day," I admitted. "But not the way I used to." "What's different?" I tucked the blanket around her. Took a breath. "I used to think about him and feel like there was a hole in me. Now I feel sad for him. For what he's missing." "And what is he missing?" she asked. I looked around the room, the framed photos, the books, the warmth of a life shared in trust. "This," I said. "The feeling that you matter to someone. That your presence makes a difference." Mrs. Henderson reached for my hand, her gnarled fingers wrapping around mine. "You've built a good life, Meline. Different from what you planned, but good." And she was right. Because now I knew what it meant to belong. Not because someone let me in, but because I had chosen to stay. I wrote about it that night. In my journal, I described the support group meeting, Benjamin's question, and the weight of every story I'd heard. I wrote about Sarah's exhaustion, the way her laugh covered fear, and the quiet strength she showed by simply showing up. I wrote about how helping someone understand a Medicare form felt strangely satisfying, how teaching a young woman to transfer her mother without hurting her own back made me feel useful in a way I'd never expected. I no longer saw myself as the woman who'd sat on the curb with a birthday cake and nowhere to go. That version of me, abandoned, erased, still existed somewhere, but she wasn't the one writing anymore. I didn't know exactly who I had become, only that she was stronger, firmer, grounded in a kind of quiet purpose I hadn't known I needed. 3 years passed like that, steady and slow. Then, one Thursday morning in October, my phone buzzed while I was in the community center kitchen setting out coffee cups for the group. The number was unfamiliar. The voice on the other end was not Meline. Cracked, uncertain. It's Daniel. I froze, coffee pot still in my hand. Through the window, golden light filtered through autumn leaves. Everything outside looked soft and beautiful, like a painting of a new beginning. But the voice in my ear dragged the past with it. I need your help. He didn't say hello. He didn't apologize. He said he needed something. 3 years of silence. Not a card, not a call. And this was how he chose to break it. What kind of help? I asked, steady but distant. Lisa left me, he said. Turns out, throwing your mother on the street isn't a great look for a husband. He laughed bitterly. She took half of everything. I lost my job 6 months ago. Drinking got worse. Now I'm being evicted. I have nowhere to go. I said nothing, listening to the desperation swimming just under the surface. I had imagined this moment, fantasized about it even. But in those dreams, there had been shouting, or tears, or some grand apology that finally made the pain worth it. This was none of that. This was flat, hollow, exhausted. I thought maybe, he continued, you could help me figure things out. You always were good at fixing stuff. The old me, the woman who had scraped together rent and hidden pain and made birthday cakes no matter what, would have dropped everything. She would have seen this as hope. Proof that their relationship could be saved. But that woman had died quietly, unnoticed, the day Daniel slammed the door. I can give you some resources, I said. Phone numbers for shelters, housing assistance, food banks. You'll have to do the rest. He paused. Resources. I'm not asking for a pamphlet, Meline. I'm asking for help. Real help. He called me by my name. Not Mom. What kind of real help do you want? I asked. A place to stay, he said. Just for a little while. A loan to get me through the first month. Someone to vouch for me. I closed my eyes and exhaled. What makes you think, I said quietly, that I would help you after what you did? There was silence. Then, because you're my mother. I could have laughed. I was his mother 3 years ago when he spit on me. I was his mother when he locked the door and walked away. But that didn't stop him. You didn't just hurt me, I said. You erased me. You called me a deadbeat. You told me I was nothing. And now you want to pretend none of that happened. I made mistakes, he mumbled. I was under pressure. I didn't mean what I said. You didn't mean to leave me homeless. You didn't mean to ignore me for 3 years. Yes. Because it worked out real well for you. I'm sorry, he said. But we can't change the past. We can only move forward. The words stung not because they were cruel but because they were hollow. He wanted a reset without consequences. He wanted me to carry the weight again. You're right, I said. We can't change the past. And I am moving forward. Just not with you. His tone shifted. So that's it. You're going to abandon me now. The irony hit so hard I had to steady myself on the counter. I'm not abandoning you, I said. I'm making the same choice you made 3 years ago. I'm choosing my own well-being over a relationship that was destroying me. You were draining me, he said. You. I was sick. And scared. And asking my son for help. You are a grown man who made a mess and now want someone else to clean it up. There is a difference. More silence. Then smaller, shakier. So you won't help me at all? I sent you the same resources that helped me. Shelters. Food banks. Job support. They're good people. They helped me rebuild my life. These are charity organizations. Yes, I said. The same kind of organizations that kept me alive after you threw me away. Long pause. Then a voice I hadn't heard in years. The boy inside the man. Do you hate me? The question stopped me. Because I had expected it for years. And now that it came, the answer was crystal clear. No, I said. I don't hate you. But I don't trust you. I don't need you. And I won't let you hurt me again. But I'm your son. You were my son, I said gently. Now you're just someone I used to know. The line stayed quiet. Then, Will you ever forgive me? I already have, I said. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. And it definitely doesn't mean letting you back into my life. Then what does it mean? He asked. It means I hope you figure out how to be the kind of person who wouldn't do what you did. I hope you build something better for yourself. But I won't be part of it. When I hung up, my hands didn't shake. Through the kitchen window, I saw Sarah arriving with her dad's insurance files. Benjamin was locking his car with a tired smile. Mrs. Montgomery's daughter walked in with steadier hands than the month before. These were my people now. Not by blood. By choice, I poured the coffee into paper cups and arranged the chairs in their usual circle. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and cinnamon air freshener. It wasn't much, but it was ours. A space where people could come as they were. Tired, overwhelmed, grieving, furious, or just too numb to explain. No one here asked you to be okay. They only asked you to be honest. As the members of my support group trickled in, I smiled, welcomed them, and passed around the cream and sugar. Each one of them carried a story that had nearly broken them. A father who wandered off every night because of dementia, a mother who lashed out in confusion, a spouse whose illness had slowly taken away the person they used to be. And yet they showed up, month after month. Because here someone understood. Because here they were no longer invisible. I took my seat in the circle, notebook in my lap, and looked around at the faces that had become so familiar. Benjamin leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. Sarah pulled out a folder thick with paperwork and took a deep breath like she was preparing for battle. Others simply sat quietly, the weight of their lives showing in the way they held their shoulders, the way their eyes darted from floor to ceiling before finally settling on each other. This is our space, I said gently. There's no fixing in this room. No pretending. Just honesty and support. Whatever you're carrying, it's safe to set it down here for a little while. Heads nodded. Someone let out a quiet sigh, the kind that's been held in too long. And then they began to speak. They talked about the exhaustion that came from always being needed but never asked how they were. About the guilt of losing their patience. The shame of sometimes wishing it would all just end. They talked about funerals they weren't ready for, and about the deep ache of being forgotten by friends who couldn't handle their reality. As they spoke, I listened, not just with my ears but with everything I had. 'Cause I remembered. I remembered sitting alone in the dark, wondering if I mattered to anyone. I remembered the silence after Daniel's door slammed. The days when I was too proud to ask for help and too broken to believe I deserved it. One of the newer members, a young woman named Tasha, said something that stayed with me. She was caring for her grandmother, juggling 2 jobs, and hadn't slept a full night in over a month. I feel like I'm disappearing, she said. Like I'm vanishing inside someone else's story. I looked at her and spoke softly. You're not disappearing. You're evolving. You're changing shape to hold someone else's world. But this space, this room, it's where you get to come back to yourself. After the meeting, when the chairs were stacked and the lights were dimmed, I checked my phone. Daniel had sent a text. It was long, angry, blaming. He said I'd abandoned him, called me cold, threatened to tell people what a terrible mother I'd been. I didn't read it all. I didn't need to. I deleted it without responding. Some stories tell themselves over and over until the narrator decides to stop repeating the same chapter. Daniel was still stuck in the version where I was the villain. But that wasn't my story anymore. My story was about rebuilding. About stepping out of a role I'd been assigned. The desperate mother, the dependent woman, the one always begging to be loved, and stepping into a role I had chosen. I didn't need to be a martyr to prove my worth. I didn't need to open my door to someone just because we shared DNA. Family wasn't about obligation. It was about respect. About showing up when it mattered. About never making the person you claim to love feel disposable. As I walked out of the community center that evening, the cool breeze felt good against my skin. I watched the sun dip below the horizon and felt something settle in my chest. Not grief, not regret. Just clarity. I wasn't the woman on the curb anymore. I was someone who had been thrown away and had the courage to keep going. I was someone who helped others carry their burdens without losing myself in the process. I was someone who knew now, with full certainty, that love without respect isn't love at all. It's dependency wearing a mask. And I had taken off that mask. For good.